In this video, we will solve the medium difficult exercises of the number series. You will need a notepad and a pen so you can do math on the side. At the beginning of each exercise, I will give you some time to solve the task yourself, and then we will solve it together. In this video, I will no longer write the various correct options of individual steps under the tasks, but only the ones that are sought. Nevertheless, you should continue to do so you have all the options in view. The result will be calculated at the end and the answer transferred to an answer sheet. Feel free to pause the video at any point if you need more time. With practice, I am certain that you will master these exercises as well. So now let's get into the first exercise. So for exercise 1, we can see that the numbers are alternating with getting smaller and larger. So we definitely have an alternating operator here. If we start with the first two numbers, we see that the difference between them could either be divided by 3 or minus 48. And the next two numbers is definitely plus 3. If we go to 27 to 9, we can see that that's clearly divided by 3. So if we follow that pattern of numbers all the way across, we end up with 4 plus 3, which yields 7. So the answer is 7, and then we can go ahead and mark that in the answer sheet. And now on to exercise 2. In this exercise, we can see that the numbers are definitely getting larger, so it's either plus or multiplication. If we look at the first two numbers, it could either be plus 6 or multiplied by 1.5. The next two numbers are either multiplied by 2 or plus 18. But if we go all the way across, we see that it's times 1.5 and then times 2, which gives us a final answer of 324. So we mark 2, 3, and 4 in the answer sheet. And that is exercise number 2. And this one is a little tricky, but again, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of writing the patterns all the way across to ensure you're getting the right answer. Moving on to exercise number 3. Because the numbers get smaller pretty dramatically quickly, you can see here that probably the series rule will need to be division. So the first two numbers, the relationship between them is divided by 3 and then 2. And this pattern we can see will alternate all the way across the board, divided by 3 and then divided by 2 again. So when we get to 8 divided by 2, that yields 4. And then we're just going to go ahead and mark 4 on the answer sheet. And there you have it. So then we will move on to the next exercise. In this exercise, we can see that the numbers are consistently getting smaller. So again, if we track the rule across, we see that it's going to alternate between divided by 3 and minus 3. So again, we have 2 minus 3, and that yields negative 1. So we mark minus and 1 on the answer sheet. Do not forget to mark the minus sign on the answer sheet. This is a common mistake that can lose you a lot of points, but let's move on to the next exercise. For this exercise, we can see once again that the operators will be alternating between something that's going to add numbers and then remove them. if we look, the first rule is going to be multiplied by 3. We have 8 to 24, and then 9 to 27, and then the second rule will be minus 15. We see that in 24 to 9 and 27 to 12. So if we just go ahead and fill in those numbers all the way across the board, we see 36 minus 15 yields 21. We mark 1 and 2 on the answer sheet. And then moving on to the next exercise, we have yet again an alternating rule here. We can see that because we have one negative number. So the first rule will be subtracting 17, and we can see that from 2 to negative 15 and 34 to 17, but then we're adding 49. So pretty straightforward. 49 plus 49 is 98, and we mark 8 and 9 on the answer sheet. All right, now we are moving on to task 7. And task 7 is definitely a little trickier, but don't let it freak you out. Just write the rules all the way across. So first you have plus 4, and then times 4, and then minus 4, and then divided by 4, and then plus 4 again. So you can see that we're actually just cycling through all the different operations, and we end up with 7 times 4, which is going to give us 28, which we're going to mark on the answer sheet as 2 and 8. So moving on to the next exercise. So for this exercise, we're going to be alternating again, and we can see pretty quickly that the first rule will be multiplied by 6, 7 to 42, 10 to 60, 28 to 168, and then the second rule will be subtracting 32. So finally, 168 minus 32, that's going to yield 136. So we are just going to do that calculation out and then mark it in the answer sheet, and we will be on to the next exercise. Task 9 is a bit more complicated and actually something that I would like to spend a bit more time talking about to introduce. The only relationship that can be found between the numbers here, which are clearly decreasing, requires that you add 1 to the number before dividing by 2. So, for example, 385 plus 1 divided by 2 gives us 193, and we can see the same rule applies with 193 to 97. This type of task is rare, but it's something that you should be on the lookout for. And if we finish everything out, we see 13 plus 1 divided by 2 is going to give us a final answer of 7. So we're going to go ahead and mark that and then move on to exercise 10. And this exercise, compared to the last one, is fairly straightforward. First, we are adding 43, and then we are dividing by 4. So if we add that all across, write down all the numbers, we get 52 divided by 4, which is 13. So we are going to go ahead and mark 1 and 3 in the answer sheet, and then we'll go ahead and move on to task 11. This too is another task that looks difficult at first, because if we write everything straight across, we see that we're adding 17 and then 34 and then 51 and 68. But we can see that we're actually adding 17 to what we're adding every time, which means at the end we have plus 102, which will yield 371. It's okay if you can't immediately recognize this task and maybe want to skip it. What's important is getting as many tasks done as you can and being able to pick up the patterns quickly. So moving on to the next task. This task is a simple alternating pattern of multiplied by 9 and then minus 23. So if we just go ahead and recognize that and then write that pattern all the way across, times 9 minus 23 times 9 minus 23 times 9 minus 23, we ultimately end up with 94, so we mark 4 and 9 in the answer sheet. So next exercise. Task 13 is another cascading rule. So if we take 50 to 39, that's minus 11, 39 to 30, that's minus 9, and then minus 7, minus 5, minus 3. So we can see that in between each rule we're subtracting 2. Or adding 2, I should say, because it's negative numbers. So we end up with minus 1, 15 minus 1 is 14. We mark 1 and 4 in the answer sheet. Now, this type of task is tricky, but try to follow along as best as you can. If we write the pattern across, we see that we have plus 3, and then plus 2, and then plus 3, plus 6, and then plus 5. So we can see that each time the numbers rotate through, we're going to add 2. So plus 3, plus 2, plus 3, plus 6, plus 5, and then finally we have plus 6 again, which yields 45 plus 6, that's 51, so we'd mark that in the answer sheet. But again, this is a pattern that takes a little longer to look at, so if you see this on the test and you get confused, it's okay to move on to a different task and then come back to this later. What matters is being as speedy as possible again. So, yep, we're marking 51, and then we will move on to the next exercise. So this is another one where the numbers kind of skip around a bit, but just write out the rules. So we have plus 4, then plus 5, then plus 7, plus 8, plus 10. So we can see that every other number we're adding 2 instead of 1. So finally, when we hit the last rule of plus 10, we're going to add 1 to that, and that gives us plus 11. 56 plus 11 is 67. So we will mark that. Again, these sort of recursive rules are a little trickier. Make sure you're practicing these, but moving on to the next exercise. Okay, so this one, again, the numbers are decreasing, and we can see that we subtract 2, and then subtract 4, and then 8, and then 16, and then 32. And we can see that the number that we subtract by is doubled each time. So by the time we finally hit the last number, it's minus 64, and we get that's minus 70. So we just go ahead and mark that. Moving on. So for task 17, it requires a little bit more of mental arithmetic, but don't be nervous, and you can always write down your math on the paper if that's helpful. So we have times 3 and then divided by 6, switching off. So we have 108 divided by 6, which yields 18. So we just go ahead and mark 18 on the answer sheet. Again, try not to freak out about the mental arithmetic. You'll be fine, and you can always write it down on the paper. But in the meantime, let's move on. So exercise 18 is clearly another recursive exercise. We're subtracting 3, then 6, then 9, then 12, then 15. So we're adding 3 each time in between the rules, which will give us 55 minus 18, which yields 37. So we just mark 37, and then we are on to exercise 19. And this exercise may look scary at first, but just focus on writing down the rules and seeing what the relationships are. So first we have 720 to 720 divided by 1, then divided by 2, divided by 3, divided by 4, divided by 5, divided by 6. So another recursive rule, and we end up with 6 divided by 6, which is 1. Exercise 20, once again, deals with large numbers, but don't let that throw you off. If we look at the relationships, we can see that it's actually a fairly straightforward problem. We're switching off between dividing by 2 and dividing by 3, so we end up with 24 divided by 3, which of course is going to give us 8. So as you can see, not too bad after all. It's understandable if the larger numbers freak you out at first, but try not to let the test psych you out. Focus on your arithmetic. You can practice arithmetic in your head, and you got this. Okay, so moving on to exercise 21. So for this one, again, it's straightforward subtraction, but we have minus 3, minus 2, minus 1, minus 1, minus 2, which suggests that the direction of subtraction is going to switch, and we're going to get 79 minus 3 equals 76. So mark the 6 and 7, and then moving right along to the next exercise. In task 22, we have two different things going on here. Not only are we switching off between subtraction and multiplication, but for each number we add, we are adding 1. So finally we have 7 times 6, which yields 42. So mark 2 and 4 on the answer sheet, and we'll move on to exercise 23. And we will return to another more straightforward type of alternating task. If we write this out, we can see it alternates between plus 37 and divided by 7, and then you subtract 1 for each addition. So we end up with 42 divided by 7, which equals 6. If you have your times tables, this should be fairly straightforward, but if not, just try and practice those as much as you can. So moving on to exercise 24. In this task, we are switching between addition and division. So we can see that we are consistently dividing by 2, but for each number that adds, we will be adding 49. So we end up with 78 divided by 2, which is 39. So this task should be a little easier. If we just start writing straight across, we're going to notice pretty quickly that we are adding 18 consistently across the board. And again, these task types are really very common, so it's important to practice them. But yes, we will just be adding 18 straight across. So we'll take some time to fill that in and get 117 plus 18, which is 135. So we're just going to mark that on the answer sheet and then move on to the next task. In exercise 26, we have a little bit of a fake out because at first you think the first step could be multiplied by 3 or adding 22, but we quickly see that it's adding 22 and then subtracting 27. So if we carry that all the way across, we get 23 minus 27, which is -4. Again, do not forget the negative sign on the answer sheet, but then we'll move on to task 27. So again, for this task, we have a simple alternating situation. We will be alternating between dividing by 3 and subtracting 6. So we just fill that in all the way across. 6 minus 6 is 0. Mark it on the answer sheet, and you're on to task 28. Task 28 is another alternating task. So we can see it's minus 19, then plus 17 all the way across. 9 plus 17 gives us 26. So we just mark 2 and 6 on the answer sheet and on to 29. So task 29 is again slightly more tricky, but don't freak out. Just focus on writing the rules all the way across and then noticing the patterns. So -6 to -48, that is going to be multiplication by 8. -48 to -8 is going to be adding 40. -8 to -56 is going to be multiplication by 7. -56 to -16 is again adding by 40. -16 to -96 is multiplying by 6, but then we are simply just going to add 40 to -96, and we're going to end up with -56 there. So we're just going to mark -56 on the answer sheet and move on to the final exercise, exercise 30. So this one, again, will just be alternating between multiplication by 9 and then subtracting 22. So we're just going to apply that rule all the way across. 207 minus 22 is 185. Mark 158 on the answer sheet, and then you are done with exercise 30. So that was 30 medium difficult number series questions, and it's important to keep in mind that the test is primarily composed of easy and medium number series questions. So at this point, if you've followed along with both videos, you should have a great basis. Keep practicing, keep going through the exercises, and I wish you the best of luck on the test and as you continue practicing.